Join me today for another book review, this time Europe's Last Summer by David Fromkin. Welcome to the Geek Cabal channel. My name is Bobby, and today we're going to be doing a non-fiction book review on Europe's Last Summer by David Fromkin. In case you couldn't read the subtitle there, it's Who Started the Great War in 1914? For those of you who are not historically inclined, that would be World War One. And I read the book quite a while ago, but I'm trying to go through and do some reviews on books that I've read that helped form some of my opinions on things or that I thought were good, without hopefully having to dip into the 150 some odd Forgotten Realms novels that I've read. Unless you guys want to see that, let me know down in the comments. So I wanted to tackle some of the nonfiction side, because I've got a dozen or so BattleTech book reviews on here, and so might as well kind of spread the love here. So, like I said, I read this book quite a while ago, and I actually ended up doing a report on it for a class somewhere along the way. And I found the book very interesting. Me as not a historian, I learned several things from it regarding World War One, and I know that most people that know anything about it know that it was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand that sparked the whole conflict. And I'd have to imagine there's people out there like myself who always thought, well, how could shooting one person lead to a global conflagration? Fair question. And this book details why that happened. And I'm not even going to call this a spoiler. This is something that happened over a century ago, and parts of it go back centuries. But essentially, there was a web of alliances, both publicly known and secretive, that led to certain countries basically being compelled to take certain actions. With the main cornerstone to everything being a treaty between Germany and Austria-Hungary. And normally, in a mutual defense treaty, like say the one that binds the NATO alliance together, there's certain provisions. The big one being that if your allied country is the one who started the conflict, you're not going to rush to their defense. So to use the NATO example, let's take Turkey for instance, because they occasionally seem a little volatile. No offense to anyone from Turkey listening to this. I'm not trying to disparage your country or anything, but at least in Western media, your leader is depicted as a little unhinged occasionally. So let's say Turkey decides to just, and invade. There's an island that's under dispute whether Greece or Turkey owns it. Let's say Turkey goes all in and actually attacks Greece. Now, it's probably a bad example because I believe Greece is also a NATO member. And I don't know what happens when one NATO member attacks another. But let's just say, for argument's sake, Greece was not a NATO member. Well, Turkey would not be able to call on the other NATO nations to aid in its war effort or its defense if, in the event somehow Greece was able to turn the tide. And again, no offense to the Greeks, but Turkey's a larger country with a larger budget and everything, so presumably has a better military. So in that event, you can't do that. Or to dabble in current events, you have the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. Now, even if Ukraine were to join NATO right now, which I am given to understand, and I'm not a lawyer, not an expert in international affairs, but I'm given to understand that given that they are in the middle of a conflict, they can't by the NATO charter. But let's say, let's say the people running NATO realize that those are just words on paper and there really isn't an enforcement mechanism, and they let Ukraine into NATO. Well, a further provision, I believe, is that, since they're the whole point is so that if a country were to join, they're not right in the middle of the conflict to automatically suck in the rest of NATO. And so NATO would be at a bizarre crossroads at that point, because they would have already broken their charter by allowing Ukraine in, but Ukraine's in the middle of a conflict. So what do they do? And that's the kind of situation that certain countries found themselves in, primarily Germany, because Germany had a treaty with Austria-Hungary that did not have the usual provisions of, if you start the conflict, we're not going to come to your aid. And so they literally tied their fate to whatever the ruler of Austria-Hungary decided. And after the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, they decided to go in and declare war in the Balkans. So that's what happened. And then Germany's sitting there like, well, in order to defend their right to retaliate for the assassination, we have to make sure that certain other countries don't get involved, because they had alliances with other countries in the region. So they're like, well, we have to cut off the Russians, and we also need to cut off, I believe they were thinking they needed to cut off the British. But they had to do so by means of going through Belgium, which meant invading Belgium. And there's certain other events that all just happened out of a whole, well, we've got to stop, we can't let these people interfere in the little war going on here in the Balkans, so we've got to invade some other people. Also, this will give us an excuse to invade some other people. And so, yeah, because I believe the book covers this part. Germany at the point in time had, I want to say they had the largest land army, or at least in Europe. But the problem is naval access, lack of colonies and things like this. Their army was basically useless unless they could turn it against the rest of Europe, which they didn't want to do. And then this excuse comes along and all right, well, tally-ho. So, yeah, and then once England got involved, all of England's colonies got involved. So now all of a sudden, at this point in time, we're talking India and Australia and, just other parts of the world. So this is how it quickly escalated to a global conflict and started drawing in powers from all over the world. And, yeah, and then somewhere in there, the Ottomans get involved too. And so it all goes back to this alliance, this poorly worded alliance that was poorly worded intentionally, I'm sure, to give the Germans an excuse to do their thing. And so they just had to wait for the right moment. And I believe the book also goes into how Austria-Hungary might have known or possibly set up the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand as well, to give them their pretext, or at the very least, they intentionally ignored potential problems, hoping that the pretext would come along. So, yeah, it's like I said, the book goes into a lot of that, and there are parts of this that go back centuries. This wasn't just like an immediate thing. This isn't like, say, World War II, which largely came about because of the events of World War I. So there you're talking 20 to 30 years of events with a handful of primary events driving them, and then in World War II was a primary instigator of the Cold War. So, there's a chain of events for later wars, and those you can clearly trace, this war from this war from this. But World War I, its tail goes back, centuries of various schemes in the making, all finally colliding in a catastrophic war. So, As a result of all that, I don't know if the book touches on this or not, but I do know that as a result of that, countries have tried to make it a point to make sure that all their treaties are public so that people know about them, so that everyone knows where everyone stands. We don't have some secretive treaty where, like, the United States is sitting there, it's like, oh, well, Madagascar got invaded, so now we're going to nuke the, former Soviet Union or something, bizarro things like that. You can't be having that, It's very similar to, for those of you who've seen the movie Dr. Strangelove. The plot to the movie revolves around a crazed general, I think he's a general, decides to preemptively initiate a nuclear attack against the Soviet Union. This during the Cold War. And targets deep inside Russia. He's in charge of Strategic Air Command, so they launch the bombers, and then sets in motion everything to make them cut off their communication. They'll only accept coded phrases. He's the only one with the code. All kinds of things like that. All the fail-safes that are meant to make sure that Soviets couldn't interfere, but could also be used to make sure Americans couldn't interfere to stop them if the right things were done in the right order. So, this is bad, but it becomes much worse when the Soviet ambassador tells them that they have a doomsday weapon where several of their complexes of their weapons of mass destruction are set to automatically go off if certain things are hit, and it's all controlled by a computer, and they can't just unplug the computer because it'll perceive that as an attack. So the whole thing is like very ingeniously designed. And the U.S. president's like, oh, that's preposterous. And the scientist there, Dr. Strangelove's like, well, I mean, not really. All you need is a sufficiently powerful computer and the right coded instructions. He's like, however, the whole point of a doomsday device like this is that your enemy knows that you have it. Which they didn't, the U.S. And the ambassador's like, well, the premier loves his pomp and circumstance. We were going to unveil it on Tuesday. And it's like, so, a series of comedic mistimings basically end the world in that movie. And so, similar concept here. These secret alliances, they're detrimental because the whole point of the alliance, at least in theory, isn't to hope that the alliance is triggered to give you an excuse to engage in military aggression. The whole point is to dissuade your enemy from engaging in military aggression, which they won't do if they don't know about the alliance. So, yeah. But yeah, that's the kind of thing the book goes into. Very in-depth, very well-researched. The gentleman who wrote it also wrote another book on the topic, A Peace to End All Peace. And, yeah, it's well-written. I recall reading through it very quickly. So it's not, it's not just dry text. It's in the shape of a narrative, and does end on a, kind of talking about could this kind of thing happen again, and yeah, it's a good book. Let's see if I can get a shot here where it's not being bleached out by the sun. I think I got it there. Yeah. If this is still for sale on Amazon, which I think it is. But I'll double check if it is. There'll be an affiliate link down in the description and a pinned post. So if you feel like checking it out, you want to, help us out in the whole affiliate thing, like, by all means. But otherwise, like if you're just, checking out your local library or something, if you still have one, definitely worth checking out. But yeah, overall, I think it's a good book, and you guys should definitely check it out. So let me know down in the description what you think. Does it sound like an interesting book? Have you read it before? If so, what's your opinion of it? Do you know any other good books on the topic? Fill the rest of us in. But anyway, thanks for watching. I always appreciate like, share, subscribes, all that fun stuff, given that this is YouTube. But otherwise, keep on turning those pages. See you out there.